talking about Atlanta's history as well too. Again, my name is Kershik Sims Alvarado. I have been with the Herndon home for about 25 years. So I have worked here for almost a decade. It was one of my first jobs after college. I told the executive director, as a matter of fact, going all the way back to 1865, and I think that I'm the type of scholar that I am because of my relationship with the home, working in the archives, and being able to learn history within a dynamic, well-preserved historic landmark as well too. But my book that I'll be talking about today is on Atlanta and the Civil Rights Movement beginning in 1944. So I look at 20 years prior to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so what I wanted to do in my research is to answer the research question of how Atlanta came to be known as the epicenter of the Civil Rights Movement. I asked that part of that question in my book, but the true answer is that the activism of Atlanta being the epicenter of the Civil Rights Movement goes back to looking at some of its early history, looking back at 1865. And you see some of the earlier pioneers. One of those pioneers was actually Alonzo Herndon, as well as his son, Norris Herndon. The period in which I'll be talking about today in my book deals with the time period in which Norris Herndon was actually the second president of Atlanta Life. His father was, Alonzo and Norris, as a matter of fact, were co-founders of the Niagara Movement, which was the 1905 organization that was the precursor to the NAACP, an all-black civil rights organization that was formed in 1905. And then, and just fast forwarding, you began to see the activism of Norris, where he becomes the largest financial contributor of the Civil Rights Movement, and that actually can be documented. Other people in town claim that they are.
Everyone y'all for coming out here today, because like she said, there's usually a lot of empty seats, so thank you and everyone y'all for coming out here today. My book is titled Asclepius, and it's based in modern day Atlanta. There are some tie-ins to older Atlanta. And in fact, my main character, Dr. Jaffrey Chance Du Bois, was loosely inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois, which is why I wanted to have it on his birthday here. His 151st birthday here today. There's also some tie-ins to Atlanta's history in the book as well, some references to the Atlanta riots of 1906, as well as Alonzo Herndon. And I'll explain more how I stumbled upon Alonzo Herndon. It wasn't intentional. I was doing research for my book, saw his name, did more research. The more I did, the more I became intrigued with the story, which eventually landed me here, having it hosted here at the Herndon home. But I'll talk a little later, and thank you all for coming. But to use them in our everyday lives and our careers. Artisanship, that's what I've come to learn is my gift. Initially, I used to think it was creativity. But for me, that's not all encompassing enough, because not only do I excel at and enjoy creating, I love building and creating. And it started when I was a kid. I would always draw pictures, and it evolved into me painting pictures in college, and even being like a self-taught writer in college. And for me, that building component, I've always enjoyed and excelled at hands-on projects, actually building, and which is probably why my major is construction management. Nothing to do with the creative side at all. And for me also, even like a painting is building a composition. When you're writing a story, you're building this story, this world, these characters within this universe. And so I started, writing short stories in '97. It was just for fun, didn't think anything of it. And in fact, I had a class. It was just a plant biology class, an elective. And I had to write a paper on a plant that has importance to a certain civilization. And I chose to do that on the lotus plant as it relates to the ancient Egyptians. And again, it's just an elective. I was just trying to get done with it. And later on found out that paper was published on the school's website and it's still there today. And a few years later, I did just a Google search of it. You can look it up too. It's called The Lotus in the Nile, like a lotus plant in the Nile Valley. And I was surprised to see that people actually reference my work. I'm like, I did this paper just as a necessity for class, and here it is, people are referencing my work. So at that point, I realized that I might actually have a gift for writing. So I started taking it more serious and had graduated college, working at the liquor store, and started writing a story about this mafia family. It will later come to be known as Murder at Venegones, and it's my first published book, which is available on Amazon also. But it didn't, I didn't finish it then and there. I started the story, and dreams delayed. As many of us do, we take our dreams and passions and put them on the back burner. I did that back in '97, and didn't really think about it until I had a friend of mine ask me, like, yo, man, what's up with that Venegones? Didn't even know he knew about the story. And that kind of planted a seed in my head, like, I need to get back on that story. So it's good to have friends in your corner who hold you accountable for those things you say you're going to do and kind of push you towards that goal. So I started back working on the story for Murder at Venegones, and kind of dabbled in here and there. And this is like 10 years later. So I'm watching Entourage, and I keep hearing this thing called a screenplay, script. At the time, I had no interest in the film industry. I didn't know what the hell a screenplay was, but obviously it's very important because they keep talking about it in the show. So once I found out that a screenplay is a written version of a movie, I felt like, I love movies. I try to go every weekend if I can. I like Netflix, is cool, but I love going to the movies. I go every weekend if I can, just to be inside the theater, and also love to write. So once I found out a screenplay was a written version of a movie, I'm like, that's what I have to do. So being autodidactic, I feel like I can teach myself anything. And I think each and every one of you can as well. If you have the desire to learn something, you can just teach yourself. And so I took a class at Emory University in 2009 called Writing Movies 101. And that's where I learned how to write screenplays. And one thing my screenwriting professor taught me that I think all of us could relate to and take something from. He told us to take the one story we're most passionate about and work on that, and all those other subsidiary projects that are not important, use the energy that's reserved for that. And I think we can apply that to our lives in the sense that when we have goals we're passionate about, we should use the bulk of our energy for that. And those goals that are not so important, that we're not passionate about, use the energy that's left over for that. Or else you go through life, as some writers do, having 4 incomplete novels for the rest of your lives, or 4 incomplete goals for the rest of your life, trying to multitask. So eventually, I finished the script and shopped it around to studios and contests, to no avail, several drafts later. And I decided to reverse engineer the script into a book, also as a marketing tool, because I can't get into the hands of the studios. If I write a book, everybody buys books. I can send a book to a producer. There's too much red tape when it comes to sending out screenplays. So I wrote it as a book, and that was my initial passion in the first place anyway. So I got that done. And again, Murder at Venegones is available on Amazon. So there's another script I started, which is for this right here, Asclepius. And there's a few things that kind of spawned this idea into my head. In 2015, there was this trending hashtag called Oscar So White. And it kind of planted a seed in my head about the fact that there's not a lot of movies with like a huge multicultural cast with a lot of black people in it. This is before Black Panther, by the way, And so I was thinking about writing a story like that. And I like suspense thrillers. It's my favorite genre of movies. And like Jason Bourne, I love that series. So I figured, I want to write a story. I want to see a movie. What I've learned also is a quote by Toni Morrison. She said, if there's a book you want to write and it hasn't been written, then write it. Very simple. So for me, it's like movies I like, I figure I'm going to write about them. Or books I want to write, I'm going to write them. Or that I like to read, I'm going to write them. So I wanted to see a high concept film with highly intelligent black characters, which I just don't see. There's a lot of comedies out there, There seems to be a ton of comedies. Nothing against comedy writers. It's just not my thing. I don't write it, you know. But I wanted to see a movie like that with highly intelligent black characters in a high concept film. So that also gave me more fuel for this story here. And so this story essentially is a mashup of Jason Bourne and Something the Lord Made. Has anybody heard of the latter movie, Something the Lord Made?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it's a mashup of those two. This story is very fast paced. It's a suspense thriller, but the subgenre is a medical thriller. Something you don't see much anymore. So I wrote this script in 30 days. I got through it really fast, mainly because it was just very because the plot and things are taking place very fast. I was just really grinding it out and ended up finishing this script in 30 days. I've never written anything that fast. So I finished the entire script, start to finish, 30 days. It was 98 pages at the time. Now, after going back and fleshing it out, it's about 131 pages. So I shopped this around to several studios, the script here for Asclepius, and one studio had the attention of the script, and they actually wanted to proceed with it. You know, had an option agreement and everything, and I backed out of that. This script also won semifinalists in the contest. So at this point, I kind of figured I had something. You know, I had something special here. This studio wants it. Won a semifinalist in the contest. So I decided again to polish up the story a bit and reverse engineer this into a book as well, kind of as a marketing tool for the script as well. So a little bit about the synopsis. This story is loosely based on the deaths and disappearances of alternative medicine doctors. You guys may have heard a few cases here and there over the news over the past few years. Dr. Sebai might be the most commonly known case there. But I chose to use that as my theme for my book. And one thing I made sure I did not do was I don't want to mention or reference any actual cases out of respect for the families. But there was one case I wrote in here. So if there's any coincidences in here, it's strictly a coincidence and it's not like intentional. For instance, there was a story about a guy last year who worked for the CDC who rumored to have been a whistleblower about the flu vaccine and its dangers here in Atlanta just last year. And he went home and he left his car keys, his cell phone, and his wallet, and he disappeared. He's gone for like several weeks. He was found dead in the Chattahoochee River. Well, in my story, there's a case of an alternative medicine doctor who dies. He's found in the Chattahoochee River. They make it look like he was accidental, but he was actually murdered and found in the Chattahoochee River. And I wrote that before that happened. So there are some coincidences, but that's about it. So with this story, I'm telling kind of like a dual story in here. There's the one story that takes place with Dr. Geoffrey Chance Du Bois, that's the main character. And then there's also a B story that takes place on the south side of Atlanta with this character named Skrill and Country Boy. The stories do intertwine. And one thing I wanted to do was to make sure that I really like the movie Crash, first of all. Crash was a great movie. And one thing I tried to do in my story was to have those very smooth transitions that they had. They were very clever. There would be some scenes where you would see two main characters in the same scene, but they don't know they exist. So I kind of had some of those moments in here for my transition. That was fun to write and add in there. One thing I also have in here, there's a lot of references to watches and time in here. Because for me, time is one of the most valuable assets, I believe, because you don't get it back.
Sure don't.
And so the pace of the story is also kind of like there's a ticking time bomb because these two characters are pretty much trying not to get killed and solve the mystery. So there's a lot of references to time and clocks in here. So a little bit about the main characters here. Dr. Geoffrey Chance Du Bois is very loosely inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois. And but I do have to point out though that he's loosely inspired by him. It's not based on him, which is a difference. So if you're reading the story, you're reading about Dr. Geoffrey Chance Du Bois, you're like, Dr. Du Bois wouldn't do that. It's not literal. It's just some things about his life that are similar. I'll give you an example. He's Dr. W.B. Du Bois was a very meticulous planner. He planned everything, put everything on his calendar. Time was very important. So Dr. Du Bois is similar. Very meticulous planner, always wears a watch, always checking the time to make sure he's on time and whatnot. And he's also he's not against guns, but Dr. Du Bois in the story, he doesn't own a handgun. And Dr. W.B. Du Bois was averse to guns as well. He didn't like hunting and none of that. But one time he did get a gun, which I'll get into a little bit later, was during the 1906 riots in Atlanta. He felt the need to get a gun because black people were being massacred. Another character here is a few more things about Dr. Jeffrey Chance Du Bois. He's kind of ingenuous, and he's a natural medicine doctor, but he doesn't fully embrace the lifestyle the way that he should. He's a pole pescatarian. He's not a vegan. Dr. Ola Fulani, on the other hand, she's a vegan. And they both went to Meharry Medical College. That was important for me too. I wanted to kind of have a lot of references to like black institutions. I had the opportunity of going to Meharry Medical College once for what they call the cadaver ball. And it was a beautiful experience being in a room with hundreds of black medical students or future doctors. That was just an amazing sight to see. So I added that to the story as well. Justin Jacoin is another character in the story. I kind of broke convention as well with this here. I'm going to ask you guys, usually in movies when you see like a techie or someone who's like really technologically savvy, what ethnicity are they typically? What do you usually see? Asian. Precisely. So I wanted to break convention in my story. Justin Jacoin is a techie in here, and he's an African-American kid who likes old school hip hop from Atlanta. That's what he is. Right, exactly, yeah.
We can relate.
And another character here, I have two antagonists here. I won't give you much on them just to kind of avoid any plot spoilers here. But Vijay Patel is East Indian, and he's kind of like the unconventional antagonist because I haven't seen many movies with East Indian antagonists in Hollywood. In Bollywood, of course, but not in Hollywood. So I kind of wanted to break that convention and bring him into the story. And I also want to point out the fact that I didn't just drop diverse characters in the story just for the sake of diversity. They are like layered and complex characters, and they serve a purpose to the storylines. Madeline Harwick is another one. She's a very, she kind of has the poise of a seasoned politician. She drinks whiskey and smokes cigarettes. So I kind of wanted to break conventions of like having, some things that may not apply to women in stories, just to kind of make her a little bit different. She drinks whiskey and smokes cigarettes, so she's a little different, a little rough around the edges. Skrill the Country Boy. Skrill is a guy on the south side of Atlanta who sells weed. Country Boy is a well-renowned rapper who keeps his friend close, what happens to be Skrill. And again, there's two stories I'm telling here. The second story takes place about after the first third of the book, and then the stories kind of merge at some point. Kind of like Crash. I really was inspired by that writing style. And a little bit about the history I did, the research I did. I wanted to have, I just wanted to find out what was the old name of the south side of Atlanta. Simply that, because I wanted to name a chapter after that city. And as I'm researching, I found out a small portion of the south side of Atlanta was called Brownsville. And I read more and I learned that was a very affluent black area of Atlanta. They had their own churches, own schools, own pharmacies, own barbershops, and even their own newspaper called the Atlanta Independent. And one thing I also learned about that, led me to find out that the Atlanta riots happened, and essentially that area of town was targeted. A little bit briefly on the Atlanta riots, there were two Democratic, actually, nominees for governor, who were running for governor. And part of the reason that the riot started was they wanted to suppress the black vote. And both these guys, you guys heard of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper? That used to be two newspapers. I didn't know that. The Atlanta Journal was one, the Constitution was another. And each one of these Democratic nominees actually used to run these papers. One was a publisher, one was a former publisher. So they ran false stories in the newspapers about white women being raped and killed on the south side of Atlanta. And that went on for a long time. There was pushes for Southern patriotism, for them to kind of like execute vigilante justice. And so that went on for a while. And so I'm reading about it, and I see this link about this mob of whites who go to Brownsville, to this barbershop. And it says they went to Lonzo Herndon's barbershop, and there was a hyperlink there. And I'm like, wow, I had never heard of him at the time. So I bookmarked that hyperlink, go back to that, and I read more about the riots and saw that there was dozens of black people killed during the riots, which I actually think it should be more appropriately called a massacre, because it was innocent people who were just being slaughtered based on, I guess, one of the most, earlier forms of fake news. So, that's one thing that for me about that's been a challenge for writing is when I'm doing research, I get caught up, in the reading. And all I started out wanting to do was to find out the name of the South Side. And 2 hours later, I learned all these things. But actually, it's been good because now I'm inspired. I want to shoot a short film about the 1906 riots now because it's so intriguing. I'm reading a book now called Rage in the Gate City by Rebecca, Barnes, and it's really informative. Even the Atlanta History Center was not really wanting to showcase that story. It was just in early 2000s, they finally had data there about this riot. It was kind of whitewashing and covering it up from history, but it's a very interesting period. Even in this story, W.B. Du Bois, who was here as well at the time, teaching at Atlanta University, he, again, like I said, he's averse to guns, but in this case, he felt the need to get a shotgun to protect the students at AUC. So that's kind of like the similarity I brought with the two Du Boises there. And a little bit on the cover art and the title here. This here is a medical caduceus. I sketched this out and kind of had this idea of having hieroglyphs on the side. And there's a guy here who specializes in ancient Egyptian symbolism and whatnot. He actually has a line of clothing. If you look in the cover, you'll see him as the illustrator for this work here. So I tapped him to do this here. And I just kind of sketched this out. He did this here. Now, according to him, this says health and wellness. I'm going to go with that and say this way. So I took the caduceus and changed it a little bit. And there's usually two serpents around here. Mm-hmm. I have one serpent here facing off with this vine, kind of like a natural medicine. Well, natural medicine kind of facing off with alternative medicine here, or traditional medicine. Took out the staff here and replaced it with the syringe, dripping here. And that's kind of symbolic of the bloodshed of the alternative medicine doctors in the story. I replaced these wings here with there were eagle wings. These are actually the wings of Horus, which is an ancient Egyptian symbol as well. And I've also found out, done so much reading and research, this medical caduceus doesn't have any historical medical relevance. It was actually added by mistake because they confused it with the staff, with the rod of Asclepius. You can see the similarities and why they would confuse it, but this actually has no actual medical history in its relevance there. And in fact, this is the rod of Hermes, and Hermes is the god of thieves, and he's responsible for leading the dead to hell. So that's not a good association for doctors to have, obviously. This is stuck. No. And the rod of Asclepius is actually one that actually does have some historical medical relevance. In fact, if anybody's read The Stolen Legacy, I guess I can kind of say that a lot of things the Greeks learned did originate in ancient Egypt. But one of the things here was the cure for the guinea worm was Guinea worm is essentially a worm that gets under your skin. Sounds pretty disgusting, but one way to cure it was to stick a pen into the arm where the snake was, where the guinea worm was, and eventually it'll come out and wrap itself around the stick. And this is where the symbol comes from here. There's also some relevance here too with the name Asclepius. And you notice that there's a use of both ancient Egyptian and Greek mythology symbols here. And part of the reason for that is it goes back to Dr. Jeffrey Chance Du Bois. If anybody's read The Souls of Black Folk, you may have heard of double consciousness. My main character exhibits his double consciousness by his need to embrace both ancient Egyptian symbols as well as Greek mythology symbols. And it's even evident in his home. There's a scene where he's, or in his living room, he has a statue of Asclepius in one corner, and on the east wall, he has a painting of Imhotep. So that's his double consciousness kind of being exhibited there as well. I'd even talk about that in the story too. Dr. Olaf Fulani and Dr. Du Bois have a conversation about that in the story. So I'll talk about that directly. And just a little bit more about the differences between the two of them. Dr. Du Bois in the story is very ingenuous and kind of naive in some ways. He's like, he doesn't believe that, the alternative medicine doctors are being killed. He doesn't feel like they're connected. Olaf Fulani is very progressive and militant. She's like, oh no, they're connected. And I think our government's behind it. Like, she's that type. And I love the fact that they're so opposite because on the road together, it causes conflict. They have different perspectives, different ideas, and that kind of helps drive the story forward as well. I did actually have someone who reviewed my book already, a customer. I have a professional review by the African American Literature Book Club, but this came from a reader, and I value those more. First of all, she binge read my book, which was flattering. She finished it already. We had a conversation about it. And she had some good things to say about Dr. Olaf Fulani. And I'm really impressed with that because I've always struggled to write women characters, So to hear this black woman reader signing off on Dr. Olaf Fulani as being legit, I felt pretty good. Like I passed the litmus test, of creating a solid black female character. A little more on this here. Asclepius was the Greek god of healing. And part of the reason I chose to use this title because Asclepius was responsible for healing people. So essentially he was saving them from death. So Zeus in Greek mythology didn't like the fact that he was healing so many people, saving them from death because he felt like he was affecting a divine order. And so Zeus tried to kill him. I'm assuming with a thunderbolt, And so that similarity is what I have in my story. There's a direct parallel between this and the story. Zeus wanted to kill Asclepius because he was saving people from death. And in my story, the alternative medicine doctors are kind of indicative of Asclepius. And there's a power to be that wants to kill them because they're saving people from death. That's kind of like the premise that I tied into that. And a little bit about some of my future projects here and current projects. I shot a short film called Trombone Jones. If you look that up on YouTube, just look up Trombone Jones film, you'll see a trailer for that. Finished that last year. Right now, we're shopping around at Film Fest. So far, we've submitted to about 20 Film Fests and waiting to hear back. Got a few rejections. Okay, got a few rejections, but that happens. I was talking on with the guy on an interview yesterday on the radio, and he told me he saves his rejection letters. And I'm like, I don't save mine. I delete them. I don't need that energy. And let me see here. Vinigones, I'm actually working on part 2 to that. Murder Vinigones is a feud between two mafia families. I'm working on, in fact, I've already finished the outline for book 2, which would kind of be like a lead up to what happened. It's called Murder Vinigones. Obviously somebody dies, so part 2 is going to be the series of events that leads up to that. Also want to shoot, I just told you also that I'm really inspired by the Atlanta riots. I want to shoot a short film about that period, tying in W.B. Du Bois in there as well. and that'll be like an extension of this actually. And that's essentially it. But I did want to point out here that when I was doing more research on W.B. Du Bois and his response after the riots, because unfortunately he was out of town when the riots culminated. He was in Alabama. He hopped on the first train to Atlanta when he heard about what was happening because his wife and daughters were here. And that's when he got that shotgun, you know. But his speech after that was called Litany in Atlanta. And I also wanted to pay homage to W.B. Du Bois by naming like one of my chapters after one of his works. And I didn't go with Litany in Atlanta. I chose to use Peace is Dangerous. Even though that speech has nothing to do with the theme of the book, I just like the title, you know, because peace can be dangerous. Sometimes you can be so averse to situations that are happening and not taking up the right measures to protect yourselves. And that's kind of like, and it's relevant to the story because Dr. Du Bois is hesitant to get a gun, but people are trying to kill him, so eventually he gets a gun. And that's the title of that chapter, Peace is Dangerous, which comes right before Once Brownsville. And that's essentially it. But I do want to tell you guys, that it's never, ever, ever too late. Never give up on pursuing your passions or your goals, you know. I published my first book at 40, you know. That's pretty late in life, you know. So, you know, yeah, it's never, never too late. Toni Morrison published her first book at 39, and she's going on to win the Pulitzer Prize and many other awards. So I implore all of us to kind of sit back, do mindful introspection, try to find that gift, because we all have a gift. We need to just, you know, sit back, take the time, think about it, and find that gift. I'm grateful to discover mine, and I'm glad to share with you all. Thank you.
I'm asking about the content and is there any, what would you rate it, I would say?
I would say it's G rated.
Oh, well,
it's for general audiences.
okay.
Yeah, definitely. There is some depth, but it's not anything that's too descriptive.
Yeah, so we're good.
Okay. You've probably seen worse on the internet, like, you know.
On the news.
Right. On the news too, right, exactly. Any more questions?
Now, was this Brownsville, was it part of the Fulton County, or was it part of Hamilton or Hamilton?
That's a good question. The geographic location of that was just southeast of Atlanta. Because initially I thought Brownsville was all of the south side. It wasn't. It was just like southeast of Atlanta, down east of 85, just south of I guess Ralph Abernathy. Yeah. So I guess it was southeast Atlanta. Yeah. And in that book, I referenced Rage in the Gate City. They have a map of the area too. Yeah. It's actually kind of hard to find on the internet. When I was searching for Brownsville, I only saw like 1 or 2 articles. So I was glad I got that book because I was fearing that I might have had the wrong name, and I already published my book. I'm like, I can't have the wrong name on the south side of my book. so once I found Rage in the Gate City, I was like, okay, it was called Brownsville. There was a map. In fact, I have a photo on my phone. I can't show you now because it's recording, but I'll show it to you later. Yeah, Brownsville. Very interesting town, man. Full of black people doing well, and just it had the stench of Black Wall Street. The bombing on Black Wall Street. It was this wealthy area of black people that was essentially targeted, you know, through racism. It's crazy. Yeah. Any other questions there? Okay. All right, cool. All right, well, ready for you guys to kind of come on up here. Thank you, man. Hey, man. 1 or 2. Okay. So, number 15. Good.
Doctorate, okay.
Got my bachelor's. Rolling with the punches. Family. Yeah. You all right?
Okay.
Good, man. Just drove up here in this lane traffic. And you don't mind, man. It's just smooth sailing. I come up here, it's like a bump car.
Yeah. Should I sign the first situation?
That takes the phone out of coming up here. He'll give me the 5
Funny, he kind of reminds me of Justin Zacorn, the little Texas story. Yeah,
Cool, man. Let me get a shot with you here. Over there, right over